All right, hi guys. So what we're going to do today is talk about politics and the Cold War. I'd love to keep going with civil rights, but unfortunately, we need to talk about everything that's going on because unfortunately, it all kind of feeds in to itself. Remember, a lot of that resistance to civil rights, race mixing, is communism. Well, the Cold War is going to start heating up by the end of the decade. So that's why I've titled this "Turmoil in a New Decade." And what we're going to see is Kennedy's presidency, which we'll talk about in the next lecture. Kennedy is probably the first person, his new frontier really wants to get on board with civil rights, but politics and issue of the Cold War keep holding him back. So what sets this time, picking up where we left off with civil rights, what makes this so much different? Well, if we look at the Cold War, we see early on a diversion in nuclear delivery. Okay, the Soviets look to ballistic missiles. Missiles are cheaper. Missiles, you don't have to deal with human error. You push a button, off the missile goes, and it hits its target. And missile technology, thanks to the Germans, are, you know, it's so advanced. And the Soviets have their own engineers in the form of guys like Sergei Korolev, who is will be known as the chief designer. Okay, the Soviets can by 1956-57 build intercontinental ballistic missiles. What that means is you can have a missile in Asia, the Soviet Union, or in mainland Europe, and you can hit the United States. The United States, we mostly want bombers. Okay, why? Because bombers, they're, bombers have that human element, okay? In the sense, if at the last minute you decide to not drop a bomb, or theoretically if there's a mistake, despite the fact the literature of the 1960s in the form of Failsafe, in the form of Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, suggested that, bombers were just as prone to failure as missiles, there's the thought it gave us, we kept war in the human sphere. It didn't just become a machine war. But there's this issue of intelligence. We need to know what enemy capabilities are. Think back to duck and cover, that paranoia. Okay? Well, the only way, and people started to experiment with this, the only way to know if you could win a nuclear war was to know, can I destroy the other guy's nuclear launch sites before, he hits me. So we want that intelligence. And how prolific is it? Here's a map from the 1980s. Okay, these are all of the Soviet nuclear missile bases we knew of circa the 1980s. Well, we want to know, okay, well, we have to know where these are. Well, how do we do it? If we overfly with jets or something, okay, that is a violation of international law. Do we do it? Yeah, we use things like the U-2 spy plane, such as, with Francis Gary Powers, who in 1960, in the U-2 incident, will be shot down and captured. Proof that we are spying on the Soviet Union. Early on, Eisenhower will say, oh no, it's a NASA weather plane that got off course. Then he has to admit, yeah, actually, it was ours. There has to be a better way. Well, we already knew from our own missile tests. We knew from, the Soviet missile tests. And in fact, there were theoreticians. I believe Isaac Newton himself postulated that orbital velocity could be achieved. Okay? I want to say it was Isaac Newton. I could be wrong. But, Isaac Newton, okay, gravity, apple fall from the tree, whatever. But he postulated, okay, imagine if you have a gun, okay, a cannon, and you fire it, eventually the shell will drop. So you arc it up, right? And then it drops. And if you fire a little faster, it goes further than drops. And so they postulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. What happens if you fired a cannon so fast that the ball's curvature just kept curving and never actually hit the Earth? That it always just kept orbital velocity. We have this understanding in the early 1950s. So how can we translate that? Well, there's the question, if we launch a satellite, and so, okay, that satellite orbits the Earth, okay, and passes over the Soviet Union, are we breaking international law? So we want to find out, we want to test this. Well, we figured that 1957, 58, this is going to be a period of heightened solar activity. I don't know how they come to this. I'm not a scientist. But the United States and the UN pushes for this year to become what was, an international geophysical year. And an international geophysical year, what the idea behind that is, it's something that, it's an old idea by now, but it's okay. We're going to make this year the year to study this, or this year to study this. Well, this year, like, okay, we want to study the sun. We might want to do it with satellite technology. And so what we do is, there's the hope, okay, maybe we can get a satellite in orbit, or better yet, if the Soviets get a satellite in orbit, okay, if the Soviets get a satellite in orbit, then it'll overfly us. We won't complain, and the precedent will be established that, yes, you can have satellites fly over countries. You can't control that, so then we can have spy satellites. Now, we had hoped to get it done first, but the Soviets beat us to it. Right now in the United States, you have a bunch of various competing programs. The Air Force has a satellite program. The Navy has a satellite program. The Army, under Werner von Braun, remember that Nazi guy captured, that SS Sturmbannführer captured in Operation Paperclip. They have a satellite program. You have 3 competing satellite programs. NASA doesn't exist. But on October the 4th, 1957, the Soviets take an R-7 Semyorka intercontinental ballistic missile, remove the nuclear bomb, put in a special capsule, and the very first satellite is born. Sputnik orbits the Earth. This is the first artificial, man-made thing to achieve orbit. And it has no camera, no spy gear, no experiments. It has simply a ham radio that beep, 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 beep. That's literally all it does. Why? So that people could tune into it, follow it, and prove that the Soviets did indeed do this. So what's the reaction in the United States? People lose their minds. I'll post a video. I don't expect you to watch all of it, but at least watch, 5 minutes of it. A CBS special report. We had to do a special report the day after this talking about Sputnik. What the hell is it? What are the Reds doing? People were literally hiding in their homes because they were afraid the Soviets were watching them. Watch the special. See the guy. So where is Sputnik now? Okay, well, based on the orbit, we think it's right here. Like, oh, so it's going to miss us this trip. Okay, we can, for 90 minutes, we can breathe a sigh of relief. People were terrified about this. There's near panic. There's anger at Eisenhower. How could you let this happen? Why is there a missile gap? Now, Eisenhower had wanted a satellite program, but new evidence suggests that he might have actually wanted the Soviets to get into space first to establish that precedent. But then it was the thought of, okay, the Soviets do that, now we're going to show them how to do it. Well, before we can actually get something aloft, okay, November the 3rd, so less than a month later, we get Sputnik 2 with the little puppy Laika. This Laika is the first Earth-based mammal in space. They put her in a slightly enlarged thing, give her enough food and water and air for about 2 or 3 days, and she's going to orbit the Earth. They're going to monitor it on the TV, and then she'll eat, after 3 days, eat a poisoned meal and die in space. Understand, baby steps into space exploration. We have not figured out how to effectively retrofire. We have not effectively figured out how to re-enter. We can send stuff up. We just can't bring it down. In the event, they also forget, something as simple and basic as temperature. Unfortunately, Laika probably roasted to death after about 6 hours in space. But she is still the first, Earth mammal into space. Now, the American reaction, again, panic. There's actually videos of this, of, protesters. Apparently, in the American press, Laika was known as Curly. Just like, how can you do this? How can you, do this to dogs? Da-da-da-da-da. We're dog lovers, okay? You probably know this. This is like my mother. What I'm thinking. I Am Legend, okay? Whole planet can be wiped out. There can be literally 3 not zombie human beings in the movie. Billions of dead people. I don't care. The dog dies. That's it. I hate the movie. You do not kill the dog. Whereas the Soviets, it's a dog, whatever. We're going to send chimpanzees up into space. That's apparently fine, but we draw the line at dogs. Good American, good capitalists don't send dogs into space. Now, we'll in 1958 create NASA. But before then, we're just going to show how far behind we are. Okay? Understand, the United States, we believe we had a technological superiority. We believe we had a technological advantage over the Soviets. But that could not be more untrue in the early years of the space race. What happens, and I mentioned it here, there's a video, I love the show of Flopnik. In, 1957, just after Sputnik 2, we try to launch our own satellite. The Navy launches Vanguard TV-3. The satellite itself is literally about yay big. It is stupid tiny. They load it into this rocket. The rocket ignites, lifts about 6 inches off the pad, and then just crumbles down in this huge ball of fire. Ironically enough, the only thing to survive was the tiny satellite. Everything else blown up in the explosion. Parroting Sputnik, the press called it Stayputnik, Kaputnik, Flopnik. And I mean, it's embarrassing for us. It takes until January 31, 58 for Werner von Braun's team to launch what was called Explorer 1. Here's von Braun here, second to right. And now Explorer 1, again, these are tiny satellites, but they actually do stuff. This actually takes scientific measurements. It's going to discover the Van Allen radiation belt, which is something I love because we had no idea what it was. So there's a bad movie, and it later became a TV series, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. And the premise is a freak fireball meteor, because that exists, has struck the Van Allen radiation belt and ignited the radiation belt so that it is literally cooking Earth. And the only way to stop it is to fire a bunch of nuclear missiles into the radiation belt and explode them to extinguish the fire. If any of that made sense to you, you're doing better than I am. Complete nonsensical, complete not how it works, but it is the archetypical Cold War movie, okay? Because it features underwater submarine combat, nuclear-powered submarines. The Russians are the bad guy. Yeah, they work that in. Nuclear missiles, nuclear bombs, and now this new space discovery. None of it makes sense. None of it's real. But it is the archetypical Cold War movie. Now, the cool thing about Explorer 1 is it's still up there. When they launched it, okay, you plot it out on early, 60s computer, 50s computers, and you're like, okay, well, if it's at this height, this altitude, this speed, we should have radio contact here. Radio contact was delayed by about 10 to 15 minutes, so much they thought the satellite had, did not launch appropriately, had failed, broken up, whatever. Well, it turns out by tracking it, it had launched into such a high orbit, much higher than what was planned, that Explorer 1 is still orbiting the Earth as of January 16, 2016. Sputnik burned up in the Earth's atmosphere after about a year. The radio transceiver died about 3 months in. About a year later, it burns up. Explorer 1 is still up there. But this is a rare success. Many, I'll play some videos for you. Many space launches fail. There's actually, we're flashing forward to my space race lecture. But about this time we launched Project Mercury, okay? Because the Soviets are winning what is now known as a space race, okay? We don't like that, so fine, we're going to race you into space. A race to get a man into space. Spoiler alert, we lose that. Oh, we'll race you to get a man on the moon. Okay, whatever we can do to prove capitalism wins. We're quite literally the guy, we lost this game, best 2 out of 3. Best, 3 out of 5. Whatever we can do so that we can say we won. Well, getting back to my original story that I about forgot, around this time we launched Project Mercury. These are our first astronauts, okay? And so the group, the Mercury 7, there were 7 guys selected, I'm going to try to remember them off the top of my head. I'm going to fail. But Alan Shepard, John Glenn, Gus Grissom, Gordo Cooper, Scott Carpenter, Scott Carpenter. I used to be able to do this. Deke Slayton and Scott Carpenter. Well, the Mercury 6+1 at any rate. I can get 6 of them. It'll pop in at the last bit of the lecture. I'll say his name, and you're gonna be like, what? But yeah, I don't know. It's gone. But what happened is, okay, after they're all done, they're taking out. Okay, here is the Atlas. This is the rocket that we want to take you to orbit the Earth. They fire it. Does great for about 50 seconds, and then just explodes. These men have just been told, like 2 minutes earlier, this is what we want you to ride, and it has just exploded. To quote Alan Shepard, well, I'm glad they got that one out of the way. But, I mean, this was seen as so dangerous. These men could not even... Wally Schirra, there's the 7th. See, I told you I'd remember. Okay, so Alan Shepard, Gus Grissom, Deke Slayton, Wally Schirra, Scott Carpenter, Gordo Cooper, and... Oh, great, now I just forgot one I already said. Whatever, anyways, I'm done. But they couldn't buy health insurance. It was literally assumed that they were going to die. But this is because that space race, because the Soviets are the first into space. Now we are, but we can't be seen as inferior at all. In fact, part of that Cold War mentality, we have to try to prove that we are superior in everything. John Glenn, that was the one I forgot the second time. So, while we also have to do this, and what we see is the space race, I'd like to say that, okay, I myself am a space geek. I would love to have been an astronaut, but 2 things disqualified me. A, I suck at math, and B, I could not fit in the space shuttle. Of course, I'm still around. The space shuttle's retired, so Dr. Prince 1, space shuttle 0. But, I'd like to say the space race, this is the most noble thing that we as a species have done. Okay? 11 months ago, from the time I'm recording this lecture, we sent a grand piano-sized spacecraft hurtling by Pluto. As of today, we have visited all of the classical planets. Okay? We've sent stuff to Pluto. When I was a kid, I actually launched 10 years before I was born in the 70s, the 2 Voyager spacecraft went to Jupiter and Saturn, and then one of them went on to Uranus and Neptune. Okay? We have like 7 right now spacecraft or rovers on Mars. Okay? As we speak, a Japanese probe, Akatsuki, I think, is orbiting Venus. And last year, our probe, the Messenger probe orbiting Mercury, crashed in, we deorbited and it crashed in to Mercury. We have Dawn orbiting Ceres, which is the largest dwarf planet, and to the ancients was known as a planet because it could visibly be seen in the sky. You would think this is our most noble thing. But unfortunately, this is an offshoot of our desire to kill each other. Our ability to explore the universe, or at least more appropriately, our solar system, is because of our ability to kill each other. Yeah, we wanted bombers, but missile technology gets better. And if you look at missile technology, if we look at, 2 of the first successful ballistic missiles, the R-7 Semyorka, rip off the nuclear warhead, plop on Sputnik, there you go. That is how human beings go to space for the first time. This Atlas thing here, rip off the nuclear warhead, plop in a Mercury capsule, and that's how John Glenn is going to orbit the Earth in 1962. We go to space because because quite literally we're building components, either for space that we can use as missiles or missiles that we can use for space. Now, if we look at missile doctrine, okay, Soviet missile doctrine, the missiles were less accurate, they were large warhead, and they were designed to target cities. They wanted area bombardment. Why? Understand, missiles are deterrent weapons. If you attack me, I fire my missiles. If you know my missiles are going to hit cities, you're not going to attack me. The American response was with bombers constantly in the air, what were called fail-safe points. A point where at any time, if they were given the go code, they would be less than 2 hours, sometimes less than 1 hour, from their targets within the Soviet Union. Understand, both sides are in a near constant state of war. We're not actually at war, we're not declared war, but we blatantly know who we would be fighting. And so out of this, we get the 1960s policy. Yes, it's more for the 60s, but I'm wanting to mention it now because it fits in with the concept of mutually assured destruction. Known more officially in the United States as massive retaliation. The idea, okay, is that you cannot win a nuclear war. That a nuclear war would just be so devastating that no side would win. So what we said is, okay, well, if the Soviet Union fires at us, okay, we will massively retaliate on them and they will lose the war. They can't just attack us and we stand still. Similarly, the Soviets believe, well, if we were to attack them, they would fire on us. These would not just be against military targets. This wouldn't be a case of just, we're only going to, you fire your missiles and you hit our nuclear silos, we hit your nuclear silos, we call it a day. But no, we had stuff targeted for Moscow. They have stuff targeted for Washington, D.C. Remember, we have just come off World War II, the era of total war. You vaporize cities if that's what you need to do to win a war. And the flashpoint was always believed to be Germany. Or, maybe something else would happen. There's a book that I love to assign for and I should assign it for this course, but I love to have my History 1493 for the English, or the education and history majors read. This is U.S. history since 1865, called Alas, Babylon. And how it starts is the premise is you follow a couple of people as they survive World War III. And how it postulates World War III is, again, it's your standard anti-communist propaganda. They're the bad guys. But we start the war. Okay, a plane gets a little too close to a carrier group. We scramble a fighter. He chases him into a Soviet satellite territory, fires a missile screws up, and just slams into a dock. And there's a thing of, wait a minute. The Russians should be raising hell. The fact that they're not scares me, and then the narrative cuts to where you are following the main character in a city, I believe it's in Florida. No, it's in Georgia. And then you just follow his reaction as, suddenly you see a blinding flashing light in the direction of Atlanta. This idea, you follow a nuclear war. Understand, we were scared to death of it. And you can see that in the literature. This particular book, which, I've literally had students tell me it gave them nightmares. I read it in high school, and it scared the hell out of me. I had nightmares for a week. We can see it in movies like Dr. Strangelove, Failsafe, that postulates either mechanical or human error would trigger a nuclear war. Probably one of the creepiest movies that I have ever seen, and I would love to screen this for a class. It's called On the Beach, and it stars Gregory Peck. And the premise of the movie is there's been a major nuclear war. The entire planet, with the exception of Australia, is irradiated. And now you follow an American submarine crew and people in Brisbane, Australia, as they sit and wait for the radiation to be carried by the prevailing winds or whatever and exterminate all life in Australia. It's not a happy life, hey, here's how we can avoid the war. It's not oh, phew, we barely avoided war. No. The movie's basically thing is we as humans are staring into oblivion. We are going to kill each other if we are not careful. And so that fits in with these fears, these concerns, but also the fear that war would become a certainty. That it's not a question of if this happens. It's not like, well, okay, that this just might be something that goes on. No, it was, we believe this will happen. That at some point, a crazy man in the United States or a crazy man in the Soviet Union will press the button, launch a missile. And the thing is, if you look at all of this, it's not even, some of it's a bit cheerier than others. But it's not even a case of, we decide we want to vaporize the United States. Okay? Some of it is, the Soviets are the bad guys, they just want to nuke us. But a lot of it plays on the theme, we fire a missile. Well, then they fire their missiles. So then we have to fire our missiles, and we just blow everything up. Or this fear of machines taking over and human beings just stopping and ignoring the fact that we are controlling stuff far outside of what we should be doing. We're living, two countries, their finger on the button, each trying to exercise their own geopolitical wills and desires in any one wrong move. Beep, and we now have the hydrogen bomb. So we're not talking about Hiroshima-sized kilotons. We're talking megatons. And then it gets worse. Because once you start telling yourself that it's a certainty, okay, and your mutually assured destruction is reliant on deterrent, okay, I'm going to deter you by launching, by, letting you know that I can blow you up. We get the push for a first strike weapon. If war is inevitable, then you better find, and damn quickly, a way to win. So we get nuclear submarines. We've wanted to harness nuclear power anyway since 1955. You've got the USS Nautilus, the first nuclear-powered warship. You now have a submarine that doesn't have to run surface most of the time. It can stay submerged. What if you take that and made it with ballistic missiles? You now have a platform that can do ungodly amounts of damage, but it both fits that deterrent category, but also you can't kill it. You can't be sure of killing it. And so here's where we get the idea both of deterrent and first strike weapons. The Soviets are the first to do it. We respond. But the Soviets, it's diesel-powered subs. We do it first with nuclear-powered subs. The Soviet first one, I want to say it's the Golf II class ballistic missile sub. Our first, aptly named, is the George Washington. We literally take a skipjack class nuclear fast attack submarine, chop it in half, move it forward, add 100-foot section missile compartment, and there you go. Now, why this is a problem is travel time. Okay, you launch a missile from the United States, it goes fast, but it still takes like 30 minutes or so. If you put one of these babies off, say, Murmansk, launch a missile up, it can just suborbital and just, split into what are called multiple independent reentry vehicles. One missile might have 6 smaller nuclear weapons inside. You can just rain down with 10-15 minute warning at best. You get no warning. These are first strike. And so here's where you get that idea. And am I saying that this is our thought? No. Understand, in the Cold War, you have to take what country A wants, but look at how it's perceived by country B. In the case of nuclear-armed submarines, we each had the same inverse thought. Okay? Our thought for this is deterrent. If you can't hit all of my nuclear silos, then you cannot guarantee I will not fire on you. These are things that you cannot kill that easily. You know where the airfields are. You know where the missile silos are. You don't know where the submarines are. But that's for what we see. But what the Soviets see, or what we see in the guys of the Soviet submarine, this is a first strike weapon. If you can come in, launch, nuke a city, nuke Moscow, nuke Washington, D.C., long before my missiles have even fueled. And then I have to make the question, I've already lost the war. Do I launch or do I just surrender? In addition, with missiles, and now by 1960, we're committed to missiles largely. Now, we still keep bombers, but we're more committed to missiles because they're cheaper, they're quicker and faster. With bombers, a B-52 is not going to go supersonic. But these things can literally enter orbit if we wanted them to. They're quicker, they're cheaper, they're harder to shoot down, and that means they're more likely to get through. Bombers can be shot down. Missiles, you're not going to have anti-ballistic missile technology until the 70s. You're going to push for it in the 80s. And we're, realistically, we're still refining those missile shield tests today. It's possible to shoot them down, but something will get through. So what do we see about life under the bomb? And what do we see about the Cold War fear and paranoia that's driving this fear of anything changing the status quo? Nuclear drills are going on constantly. That's what Duck and Cover is about. I gave a lecture a few weeks ago before this class started in Enid talking about the Cold War, and there were a bunch of old people there. And I heard them talking before, hey, we actually went through these, nuclear drills, things like that, I had a friend who's only in his early 40s, okay? So he went through nuclear drills. You get civil defense, okay, being an ever-present reality along with fallout shelters, okay? Fallout shelters. Some of these would be ones that you would put in your backyard, not unlike a tornado shelter. Others were, buildings on, work campuses, school campuses, would be marked as fallout shelters, designed in such a way to provide at least a modicum of protection. We can see a lot of fears. I've already mentioned On the Beach in Dr. Strangelove, but another one, The Time Machine, which, The Time Machine, it's based on H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, but you see, okay, he goes forward. He, 1895, he goes forward, he sees World War I, he sees World War II, and he sees the 60s. Or what's presumed to be the 60s. I mean, it's a fantastical era, everything we thought, then suddenly you hear, and he meets a guy that he met in World War I, who's now a civil defense worker in Britain, and he's like, what is the sounds about this? And the guy's like, get down, get underground, the mushrooms are sprouting. And of course the character's like, what the hell are you? Boom, first nuclear blast goes off, second nuclear blast goes off, and then the narration in the movie is, and the Earth, so enraged at the destructive power of man, decided to basically one-up him. You start getting volcanoes and lava and earthquakes just destroying London. The message is clear in most of these movies. We are going to destroy each other. On the Beach, we've already done it. How does humanity come to grips with it? Time Machine, you get a snapshot of we start a nuclear war and planet Earth just gives us the middle finger and says, to hell with you guys. Dr. Strangelove, an accident that one plane with one bomb nukes an insignificant missile target in Russia, triggering a doomsday device that blows up so many nuclear bombs it basically encases the world in a radioactive shroud for 98 years. All life, all plant and animal life on planet Earth has been extinguished. Nobody's happy. Nobody thinks, oh, we'll never do that. Nobody thinks this is something we can prevent. Instead, the views are fatalistic. This is something that is going to kill us all. One of my favorite movies, it's the day, I want to say it's The Day the Earth Caught Fire. I could be wrong with that. But the premise, during a nuclear test, the United States and the Soviet Union detonate bombs on opposite sides of the planet, screws up planet Earth's orbit, sends it hurtling into the sun. Oops, we just broke the planet. It's fatalistic. People, if you look at the culture, the 50s and early 60s, it's very fatalistic. We're going to wipe out the planet. Both sides blame the other for the war, but yet each believes the other is going to attack first. And here's kind of the irony. We had no plans, no desire to blow up the Soviet Union. They have no desire to destroy the United States. But we each believe the other does. And so we just push for more missiles, more bombs, more tests, and, more machines and computers that inch us closer to this fear. And in fact, one of the things we'll talk about when we get to the 80s, Able Archer 83. Okay, actually, I'll just tell it now. So this is 2 years before I'm born, 1983. Some of you might have even be alive then. The Soviets had a satellite in orbit, and the whole purpose was to detect nuclear missile launches. And how it did so was it was such an extreme orbit, It put the Earth against the sun so you could, take snapshots of the atmosphere over the United States and catch the limb of the atmosphere backlit by the sun so you could see the missile trails. Missiles are going to leave a trail. 1983, flashes a warning. Massive nuclear launch inbound from the United States. The Soviets go to their version of DEFCON 1, bring all of their missile regiments to full defense readiness. Then the Kremlin passes down the order. Fire. Launch missiles against the United States. And so it comes down to one guy in the Kremlin who, his finger's on the button, he's been given the order, fire. And he says no. They order him to fire. He's the only one who can do it. He says no. It makes no sense for the United States to do this. We just tried to ease relations, 6 years ago. Now, why they're heightened is also Able Archer 83. At the same time this missile satellite screws up, we are running a NATO military exercise where we are simulating everything from massive naval deployments, call-ups, to complete strategic weapons release. We are simulating launching nuclear weapons. The Soviet satellite has picked up that we have launched nuclear weapons. The evidence does not look good for us. But this one guy whose name I cannot remember, and I'm actually going to look up because his name is incredibly important. So let's see. Soviet man who. If you type in Google Soviet man who, it pops up. Stanislav Petrov. Stanislav Petrov. He is the man who saved the world. All of us owe our existence to this man. Because he said, no, it makes no sense. The satellite will be back in 90 minutes. I'll wait. If there are missiles, I'll fire. The only problem is, if it's a 20-minute flight time for missiles, by that time, the Soviets would have already lost the war. Satellite comes back again. False alarm. It just misread its inputs. There was no launch. Kremlin passes down the order. Okay, we're going to scale down our launch protocols. We're not going to fire. So what happens to Stanislav Petrov? He was initially praised and then, no, in fact, you're fired. Why? What if it had been a launch? His waiting would have destroyed the Soviet Union. That's 1983. That's 33 years ago. Okay? Stanislav Petrov, by refusing to press the button, saves the planet from atomic war. That is how close we get. And we get almost that close in 62, and we'll talk about that next time. But I'm saying you can understand those fatalistic fears, the fears of machines, because it very nearly happens. That's 1983. That is 20 years after Dr. Strangelove. 19 years after Failsafe predicted that a machine error would send the world into atomic warfare. You get things, again, more civil defense. They would put out these manuals. There's a really good thing that my Cold War class, I should put it here, about all this stuff. What to do if there's a nuclear war. Look for this. Look for fallout shelters. There's one, and it's risque for the 50s, but it's a topless woman on a beach. And the premise of the ad says, look, we as human beings are trained to see what we want to see. You'll look at this picture. But if you stopped and looked for fallout shelter signs, oh yeah, well, no, that's a problem, That's a problem, obviously. Now, part of why we're worried about this is, again, I mentioned how the Soviets overreact. And if we look, Cold War Europe, okay, we've divided up. You've got some non-aligned states. You've got, other communist states in the form of Yugoslavia, Albania. But you have NATO and you have the Warsaw Pact. Well, in Eastern Europe, we see a lot of Soviet expansion. We see the Soviet Union, it's politically fragile. It will overreact. And so we see in 1956, Hungary. Okay, so where's my mouse pointer? Right here. Decides it wants to leave the Warsaw Pact. It's had enough. the Soviets have a once in, never out philosophy. And again, that's codified in the Brezhnev Doctrine. And they have to do this because if Hungary leaves, what's to stop Czechoslovakia or Romania or Bulgaria or Poland or East Germany? So rather than, okay, how can we find a political expedient? How can we do this? The Soviets just literally roll in a few armored divisions. Well, that creates tension. Now, the Soviets didn't mean, I don't know how you don't mean to invade with an armored division. All they're trying to do, they see it as, look, you are a satellite nation, we're just reestablishing dominance. But to us, it looks like a full-scale invasion. So if they do that here, what's to stop them from doing that in West Germany? And so we send more troops there. We send, things like those atomic cannons. And again, we just await war. If the Soviet army invades, the only way we can win are tactical nuclear weapons. And if we release tactical nuclear weapons, they release strategic nuclear weapons. And then that's just a bad day for everybody. So people think war will be inevitable. The only good thing, really, that comes out of that is we finally get the federal government stepping in with internal improvements. And that's where we get the Interstate Highway Act. And why I mention this, because this seems like, well, what the hell is this doing here, is throughout the course of human history, there's always been this question, who pays for internal improvements? The federal government or the state government? And roads had traditionally been a state government thing. We realized in World War II, these would be useful to move troops and tanks and stuff like that around. We also realized now that everybody has cars, you have growing urbanization, it would be helpful. So Eisenhower pushes through this act in 1956. And he does so, why he wants it, bolster travel, no more unsafe roads, you can have turnpikes, whatever, okay? But also, Cold War mentality, and here's the justification, they allow for quick evacuation in nuclear exchange, okay? Old 1940s era roads, many of which were 1920s era roads, are not going to let 60,000 people get out of Levittown, Pennsylvania. But if you have a good 4 or 5 lane highway system, you stand a better chance of more people surviving. Now, people tend to like it, but, and this is something that I'm sure most of you, if you're from Oklahoma, know, or from a rural area, highways tend to destroy small towns and neighborhoods. I'm just thinking, my own hometown, Skytook, Oklahoma, which again, if you know where that is, I'm sorry, I feel your pain. Just remember, it alternates roads for meth and crack. Turn right if you want the meth, turn left if you want the crack. I wish I were kidding. Oops. But we used to have a two-lane road. Then, in the, I want to say the early 2000s, they put in a 4-lane road, and it put half of Main Street out of business because you've got to widen the road, which means you lose all those parking lots. Sometimes you got to push storefronts back. And, that's going on en masse all across the United States. So we see a couple of things. We see continued modernization of the United States in this period. We see we're trying to break away from, how we had previously been. But also at the same time, it's a Cold War expedient. You can move troops around quicker. If you look, where are the highways located? The really, really big cities that we were afraid might be nuclear targets. Oklahoma City, Tulsa, a lot in the Midwest, a lot on, here, Fallout 4 area. We apparently don't, Fallout 3, Fallout 4. We apparently don't care about Fallout 1 and 2 or New Vegas. But, Fallout 3, Fallout 4, you can get out. Theoretically, you have a better chance of escaping. Now, in practice, is that going to work? No. But, again, it's at least something you feel that you can do. And that's why if you look, a lot of 2 lanes out west, but around all the big cities, it's 4 or more lanes. Facilitate quick evacuation from cities if there is a nuclear war. So then we get to the election of 1960. And as he's leaving, Eisenhower does want to ease tensions. But Eisenhower also realized something that we in the United States may have forgotten, may have lost sight of. And in his farewell address, he warns against the military-industrial complex. Now, what that is he said that, look, you have to have massive military spending to fight communism. And he said, look, you should combat communism. But beware of those people that get what he called an undue influence of power. Okay? If you decide to de-escalate war, you might not want to build as many planes. Or you might, want an arms reduction treaty. But you're putting people out of business who build those planes. So the plane makers and the aircraft maker unions, they're going to want to keep those contracts. Don't, and basically what he's saying, don't put too much stock in the people that benefit from war. I think he said, something effective, every ship that is made, rifles built, takes food away from a starving person. Okay? Don't let the people who make a buck off military defense spending get too much power. Yes, we need a strong military, but no, we don't need a strong military for the sake of the people who make the weapons. And in this, he's recognizing that the Cold War, this is when the United States stopped being the United States. Historically, we don't like a big standing military. Now we have one of the largest. Historically, we don't like having a lot of weapons laying around. Okay, we like to have to scramble for weapons the first couple of years of a war. Nuclear war, you can't afford to do that. So yes, we'll have the defense contractors. We don't like having a large military budget because you can use that money for social programs. Now, military spending increases and increases and increases and becomes one of those things politically, that you don't dare touch. And so, do we take heed of this? Not really. A lot of this we can see today. I mean, we see, those companies pushing for those defense contracts. You have things, like the F-35, which, as I understand it, the idea, one plane for each of the, for the Marines, the Navy, and the Air Force. And it sounds good on paper, except the Air Force doesn't want it. The Navy doesn't really want it. It is ridiculously over budget. It costs a stupid amount of money. And fourth and fifth generation jet fighters are still perfectly capable of taking down anything, say, the Russians have. Not to mention, in the current sphere of fighting terrorism, ISIS does not have that many stealth fighters. But yet, we are going to push through this bloated, thing that, the F-35 is, as I understand it, to date, the most expensive weapon system ever built by man. I didn't say the best, I didn't say the most useful, I just said the most expensive. Don't let the people who stand to profit from that get undue influence. That is what he is saying. But when you have people posturing to say that they're the toughest on communism, it doesn't fully work. We get that in 1960. Eisenhower's VP, Richard Nixon, runs for the Republican nominee, JFK, John F. Kennedy, for the Democrat. Nixon's more establishment and virulently anti-communist. Brannigan. Arroo. Hopefully there's some Futurama fans out there. But Kennedy is young. He'll be the youngest man ever elected president. He is rich. He is born into this wealthy family. And he's Catholic. And I mention that because a lot of people did not want to vote for Kennedy because they were literally afraid he would take orders from the Pope, and it would subvert the United States. Historically, the United States has not liked Catholics. That's kind of a new thing. Wrong button, sorry. But, Kennedy, obviously wants to burn his base, so he brings in Lyndon Baines Johnson, a more rags to riches, rural Texan. And what we're going to see is, we'll get into details about the election in a second, but, both parties have what they want to do. Both have their ideas for social reform. But a lot of it also comes down to who is going to be, and literally they would say, tougher on communism. But 1960 was also a watershed. This is the first time that whoever is elected president, they would have been born in the 20th century. Prior to this, every presidential candidate had been born in the 1800s. Now you're getting somebody born in the 1900s. So you have JFK, more young, exuberant, Nixon, who looks like he's plotting and scheming no matter what he actually does. Now, in this, we have that role of technology, and I'm mentioning this because we're really going to talk about it vis-a-vis civil rights next time. Pardon me. September the 26th, 1960, you get the first ever televised presidential debate. And so now it becomes, it's not about how you speak, how you say things. Now you have to carry yourself. And Kennedy was more telegenic. Kennedy looked better on TV. Now, this is black and white TV. You got to be able to see. So you got the big floodlights. You ever been by a big floodlight? They're hot as hell. You start sweating. So what do? You have makeup. Well, Nixon didn't want... I'm going to try to do my Nixon impressions here. So, Nixon doesn't want any of that damn makeup. It's too feminine. Those sons of bitches. He doesn't want makeup. It's too feminine. He refuses it. So, and I'll post a link to just some snippets of the first debate. But if you watch him, the dude has moisture all over his face. He is sweating like crazy. So for the old-timers who listened to the debate on radio, they thought that Nixon had won. He sounded, more the elder statesman, knew more what he was talking about. But those who watched it see Kennedy youthful, bouncy, able to engage, deal with the questions. Whereas Nixon perpetually sweating. So bad is it that when Nixon runs for president again, he refuses any televised debates because he's like, I am not making the same mistake again. So JFK becomes president. And he immediately adopts what he's called the new frontier. This is what he wants to set for his presidency. He becomes presidential. And he's what a lot of people look for when they're like, okay, how should I be? If I want to be presidential, what do I look at? As soon as you do it, you carry yourself well, you're respectable, you have a plan, you sell it to the people, and you try to do stuff. Never mind this idea of the president as a steward. You're presiding over the office. Kennedy wants young, active people in his cabinet. He is going to try to change things. By 1960, we're able to come to grips with reality. Poverty is skyrocketing in the United States. Yes, we talked, I just spent a couple of lectures back talking about the greatest standard of living in the world. But at the same time, that rich-poor gap, bigger than it ever has, and it just keeps going. Kennedy wants to reduce that. Kennedy wants to champion civil rights. He wants to change that status quo. He wants economic development. He wants to pump money into the economy. Kennedy will be one of the first presidents to push through a tax cut. This idea, you want people to buy things, give them more money to buy things. And he wants to champion NASA. Because he sees NASA is a way that you can compete with the Soviet Union. And this is a competition you can do in such a way that it will not trigger a nuclear war. And so he's got all of this hope, all of this promise. He's the first really new thing in American politics. But as we're going to see, his presidency, beyond being cut tragically short, is going to get mired in some scandals, the issue of civil rights, a few good things, a few bad things, but it's going to be all over the place. And we'll pick up with that next time. As always, if you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, bye-bye, guys. Have a good one.